The sun hung low over the prairie, casting long shadows as Fiona stumbled down the desolate road. Her feet ached with every step, but the pain was nothing compared to the weight pressing on her chest. She had been running for days now, a blur of desperation and terror, but she couldn't outrun the memories. The memories of him, Marcus Greer, her husband. No, her tormentor. She had fled, torn her life apart to escape him. And yet, here she was alone in the vastness of the prairie, her strength failing her. Her body gave out with a sharp cry, and she collapsed into the dirt, the world spinning around her. Her vision blurred, and she fought to keep her eyes open, but it was getting harder. The darkness was creeping in, pulling her under, until she heard the soft thud of hooves approaching. Clinton Maddox had been riding the fence line, checking on his cattle when he spotted the figure ahead. At first, he thought it might be a wild animal, a stray dog, or a lost horse. But as he drew closer, he saw the woman lying face down in the dirt. His heart skipped a beat. She was barely breathing, her clothes torn, her face streaked with dirt and blood. Without thinking, Clinton spurred his horse forward, the animal's hooves kicking up dust as he pulled to a stop beside her. He dismounted quickly, dropping to his knees beside her. His calloused hands gently turned her over, and for the first time, he saw her face. She was beautiful, but her beauty was marred by the terror that clung to her, her eyes wide and fearful even in unconsciousness. Her bruised arms were evidence of some kind of violence, the kind no person should ever experience. Her lip was split, a feverish flush on her cheeks. And then, in a moment of startling clarity, Clinton realized the full extent of what he was seeing. This woman had been hurt. He didn't hesitate. His hands were gentle, but firm as he scooped her up. She tried to fight him, instinctively pulling away, but her body was too weak, her resistance fading as exhaustion took over. Her breath came in short gasps, and she collapsed against his chest. Clinton's heart tightened. "Shoo," he murmured softly. "You're safe now. No one will hurt you again." The words left his mouth before he even knew what he was saying. But as soon as they were spoken, he knew they were true. He would make sure of it. She was in his arms now, and he would protect her with everything he had. The journey to his ranch felt endless. Clinton's mind raced, his every instinct screaming to get her to safety. He had no idea who she was or why she was so terrified, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let her go. The ride was slow, each step of his horse's hooves taking them farther for whatever had brought her to this point. Fiona remained limp in his arms, her body trembling from the fever and shock. Clinton's mind wandered as he carefully guided the horse, his hands never leaving her. He had seen plenty of broken things in his life. Animals injured on the ranch, the men he'd fought beside in the cavalry, but nothing like this. There was something different about her, something that tugged at his heartstrings. When they finally reached the ranch, Clinton carried her inside, his boots scraping the wooden floor as he crossed the threshold. He laid her down on his simple bed, a space that was far from fancy, but clean and quiet. He moved quickly, fetching a cool cloth for her forehead and checking her wounds. Her body was so thin, too thin, and she winced as he touched her. Clinton paused for a moment, his jaw tightening. Whoever had done this to her was going to pay. But right now, there was only one thing that mattered, getting her better. She stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open, only to snap shut again when the light hit her face. "It's okay," he said softly, his voice low and steady. "You're safe now." She didn't answer, but Clinton didn't expect her to. He wasn't sure if she could even understand what he was saying. Her breathing was shallow, and her body was stiff with fear. His mind raced, trying to figure out what had happened to her, who had hurt her, and why she was here. He didn't know her name, and she didn't speak. But somehow, he knew that this was just the beginning. Fiona's body jerked suddenly, her eyes snapping open. A scream tore from her throat, raw and full of terror. Clinton rushed to her side, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "Fiona," he said quietly, his voice calm and steady. "It's Clinton. You're safe here." Her eyes locked onto his, wide with panic. But there was something in his gaze that held her, something she couldn't quite place, but that made her feel a flicker of hope. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe it. As she finally fell back into a restless sleep, Clinton sat beside her, never taking his eyes off her. He wouldn't leave her alone tonight, not when she was so vulnerable. He stayed there, outside her door, his presence a silent promise. Fiona, lying in the bed just beyond the wall, could hear his steady breathing, and it comforted her in a way nothing else had in years. It wasn't much, but it was enough. That night, for the first time in a long time, she slept without the nightmare of his face. It was a start, and for now, that was all that mattered. The first days at the ranch felt like a dream Fiona couldn't quite wake up from. Clinton's presence was constant, a silent assurance that she wasn't alone, though she struggled to accept it. On the second morning, he brought her breakfast, the aroma of warm biscuits and bacon filling the small room. She stared at the plate for a long moment, her stomach turning in tight knots, the fear of poison from those who had hurt her still deeply ingrained. She pushed the food aside, but Clinton, not wanting to force her, simply placed the plate on the small table and left, retreating as quietly as he'd come, giving her the space she needed. She sat there for what felt like hours, watching the food cool. It wasn't until the afternoon, when hunger became unbearable, that she finally ate. The act was small, but monumental. She was beginning to trust. The days passed slowly, marked by moments of quiet observation and tentative steps toward normalcy. Fiona found herself watching Clinton as he worked outside, mending fences and tending to cattle, his movements fluid and sure. He was gentle with the animals, especially the horses, a quiet strength in everything he did. There was something about the way he handled them that made her pause. He wasn't a man who spoke much, but he seemed to communicate everything with his touch and the calmness in his eyes. She didn't know why, but it made her feel safe. The ranch hands who worked for him respected him, though they kept their distance from her, perhaps unsure of her place. Still, she couldn't help but notice how kind they were when they passed her. None of them spoke to her, but there was no animosity, no judgment, only curiosity. As the days wore on, Fiona found herself venturing a little further from her room. One morning, she appeared in the kitchen, awkwardly offering to make coffee, a small gesture, but one that made her feel a little more in control. Clinton didn't say anything, simply set the kettle on the stove and let her do it. As the rich, earthy aroma filled the air, they shared their first real conversation, a tentative exchange about the weather and the ranch, topics that held no danger. His words were kind, and he asked no questions about her past, a kindness that warmed her, even if she couldn't yet fully let him in. She wasn't ready to tell him about the man who had once been her husband, the man who had hurt her, but Clinton made no move to press. "You can stay as long as you need," he said quietly one evening as they sat together on the porch after dinner, the setting sun casting long shadows across the land. No questions asked. The sincerity in his voice startled her, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of safety. He had shown her nothing but patience and care since that first night, never asking too much, never pushing. Slowly, imperceptibly, she began to trust him. One afternoon, Clinton returned from a trip to Willow Bend for supplies. Fiona was sitting by the window, watching him as he unloaded sacks of flour and boxes of canned goods from the wagon. Her heart ached as she saw him carry wildflowers into the house, small and delicate, perhaps not much in the grand scheme of things, but it was the first time she realized that he was trying to show her kindness in a way that wasn't forced. It wasn't something he had to do, but he did it anyway. He handed her the small bundle with a shy smile, and for a moment, Fiona couldn't speak. She hadn't been given flowers since she was a girl, and they seemed like something foreign now, something too fragile for a world that had beaten her down. She didn't know how to respond, but she took them from him and set them on the windowsill. In the days that followed, Fiona started to do small tasks around the house. She helped wash dishes, took over mending a shirt that Clinton had torn while working on the ranch, and began to find a quiet rhythm to the domestic life they were building. She was still broken, still haunted by the nightmares that would come in the dead of night, but during the day, there were moments when she could almost forget. One night, the nightmares came again, the darkness of her past creeping back in with the familiar weight of Marcus's hand around her throat. She woke with a gasp, the scream dying in her throat as she realized where she was. Clinton was there, outside her door, his presence a quiet reassurance that she was safe. "It's Clinton," he said softly, his voice just above a whisper. "You're at the ranch. You're safe." She heard his breathing steady through the thin wood of the door, his calm presence anchoring her in the storm. It was the first time, in all the years of her torment, that anyone had cared enough to sit outside her door, to offer her something so simple as a promise of safety without words. And in that moment, Fiona finally allowed herself to believe it. As the days passed, the small gestures from Clinton continued, like the wildflowers he brought her, and Fiona found herself softening under their weight. She couldn't yet speak of the horrors that had driven her to the brink, but the trust was growing between them in unspoken ways. She wasn't ready to talk about Marcus, about the life she'd left behind, but she had learned that there was someone who cared, someone who would stand by her. And maybe, just maybe, she could start to believe in the possibility of a life beyond the fear. The town's whispers, though, were starting to reach her ears. On the fifth evening, Clinton went to Willow Bend again to fetch supplies. Fiona remained at the ranch, watching the horizon, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She was feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time, a flicker of hope. But there was always that fear lurking in the back of her mind. The town was starting to talk, and she couldn't stay hidden forever. As the sun sank lower, she joined Clinton on the porch, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the world settle into twilight. "Thank you," Fiona whispered, her voice barely audible, "for not asking." Clinton didn't answer at first, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Thank you for staying," he replied softly, his words as simple as the quiet trust that had begun to form between them. Neither of them said aloud what they both knew. This wasn't over. Fiona wasn't safe yet, and neither of them was ready for the truth that was waiting just beyond the horizon. 2 weeks passed, and with each day, Fiona found herself slowly shedding the weight of fear that had clung to her for so long. The nightmares hadn't disappeared, but they were fewer, and when they came, Clinton's calm voice through the door brought her a sense of peace she hadn't known since she was a child. Her body, though still fragile, had started to regain strength, and her appetite had returned, albeit slowly. Clinton's quiet care had given her the space to heal in ways she hadn't thought possible. She spent more time outside, watching the land around the ranch and the animals that Clinton treated with such kindness. There was something soothing in the simplicity of his world, a life that seemed so far removed from the chaos she had left behind. One afternoon, Clinton decided it was time to teach her to shoot. "Every woman out here should know how to protect herself," he said, his voice calm and steady as he set up a target in the dirt. Fiona was hesitant at first, the idea of holding a weapon stirring up old fears of violence and harm. But there was something in Clinton's eyes, something unwavering and sure, that made her trust him. As she took the rifle in her hands, Clinton stood beside her, his body close, guiding her gently as he adjusted her aim. His presence was a quiet comfort, a steadying force. "Relax," he said softly, his hand resting lightly on hers, guiding her to the right position. The first shot was off target, but the second found its mark. Clinton's expression softened, a rare, genuine smile curling at the corners of his lips. "Good job," he said, his pride evident in his voice. Fiona felt something stir inside her, something that had been buried beneath years of pain and fear. For the first time in a long while, she felt capable. She wasn't helpless anymore. Clinton's pride in her was a gift, one she hadn't realized she needed until it was given. It was as if, for the first time, she could see herself in a new light. No longer just a victim of her circumstances, but a person with strength, with the ability to stand up for herself. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Fiona found herself laughing at something Clinton had said. It wasn't the guarded laugh she had given in the past, the one she used to mask her pain, but a real, unburdened laugh. Clinton stopped what he was doing, his attention entirely on her, a soft smile tugging at his lips. For a moment, the world felt lighter, as though the air itself had shifted. Clinton realized, in that brief instant, that he was falling for her. He hadn't wanted to admit it, not to himself, not with everything she had been through, but it was undeniable. Fiona's laughter was a sound he wanted to hear every day. It was a promise of healing, of a future where pain no longer ruled her life. But neither of them spoke of the growing feelings between them. There was too much unspoken, too many walls still between them. Yet they shared moments, simple, unspoken moments that spoke volumes. One evening, as they cooked together, their hands brushed as they reached for the same jar of salt. The touch was fleeting, but it was enough to make their eyes meet, and for a heartbeat, everything else fell away. Clinton's gaze held hers for a moment longer than necessary, his breath catching as he leaned in slightly, as if about to kiss her. But the sudden whinny of one of the horses in the yard broke the moment, and Fiona quickly pulled away, her heart racing. It was as though the tension between them had built up in that one instant, only to be shattered by the reality of their situation. Neither of them said anything, but the air between them was thick with unspoken words. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of what could be, but also of what couldn't be. Not yet. Later that evening, as they sat together on the porch, the tension between them was still palpable, and neither of them knew how to bridge the distance that had grown between their quiet connection and the unspoken desires that lingered in the air. But it wasn't just the pull between them that hung over them. There were whispers in town, whispers that Fiona couldn't escape. Deputy Royce, who had taken an unsettling interest in her when Clinton had gone into town for supplies, had visited the ranch unannounced, with an unsettling smile and questions about Fiona's past. Clinton had responded with a controlled warning, his voice cold as he told Royce that she was under his protection, but Fiona had overheard their conversation. She had seen the way Royce looked at her, the way his gaze lingered too long, as though he saw her as nothing more than a prize to be won. The uncomfortable reality of her situation began to settle over her like a heavy fog. She wasn't just a guest at Clinton's ranch. She was a woman with a past, a woman running from a husband who would stop at nothing to find her. And she had no idea what Royce's involvement in all of this might mean. The moment was broken when the letter arrived, its edges frayed from being opened multiple times. The letter was addressed to whoever was harboring Fiona Greer, and the reward for information was boldly stated at the bottom. Fiona couldn't bring herself to read it again, but she saw Clinton burn it before her eyes, his jaw clenched in silent fury. She didn't need to ask. She knew what the letter meant. It meant that Marcus was closer than they had imagined, and that Fiona's presence at the ranch was no longer a secret. That night, as she sat by the fire, Clinton's hand brushed hers, and she realized she couldn't keep running from the truth forever. Her past was coming for her, and it would only be a matter of time before it caught up with her. But for the first time in so long, she felt something stir within her, something other than fear. It was hope. It was the beginning of believing in something better. The next morning, as she stepped out onto the porch, Fiona looked at the horizon, her heart heavy but no longer broken. She was safe for now, and maybe, just maybe, she could fight for her future. But she wasn't alone. Clinton was with her, and for that, she was willing to face whatever came next. The tension in the air that had been building over the past few days finally reached a boiling point on market day, when Clinton decided it was time to take Fiona into Willow Bend. She hadn't left the ranch since her arrival, and though the idea of facing the town's judgment terrified her, Clinton insisted it would help her start to move past her fears. She reluctantly agreed, feeling the weight of his protection, but still unsure how she would handle the whispers that were sure to follow. Clinton was by her side the entire time, his presence a shield against the wary looks that followed them through the market. Fiona stayed close to him, her hand gripping the sleeve of his shirt as though it were the only thing keeping her grounded. She wore a simple dress, one of Clinton's that was too big for her, but she hoped the modest garment would be enough to make her blend in. Still, every step she took felt like a loud statement, a declaration of her shame. As they moved through the bustling streets, she could feel the eyes of the townsfolk on her, the sharp whispers that swirled around them. But she held her head high, unwilling to let anyone see her break. It wasn't until they reached the general store that the full weight of her reality hit her. Deputy Royce was there, leaning against the counter with a smirk that immediately set Fiona's nerves on edge. He looked at Clinton, then at her, his gaze lingering a moment too long before he spoke. "Well now, Clinton, I didn't expect to see you out and about with your guest," he said, his voice dripping with a tone that made Fiona's skin crawl. Clinton's body tensed, and for a brief moment, Fiona saw something dangerous flicker in his eyes. But he didn't respond to the deputy's taunt. Instead, he stepped between Royce and Fiona, his presence as firm and unyielding as a wall. "She's under my protection," Clinton said, his voice low and steady. "And she's not your concern." Royce didn't back down, his smirk turning into a sly grin as he turned his attention to Fiona. "You know, I've heard quite a lot about you, miss," he said, his voice almost friendly, though the look in his eyes said otherwise. "An unmarried woman living with a man like Clinton? Well, that's bound to raise a few eyebrows, don't you think?" Fiona stiffened, the words striking too close to the bone, but she wasn't about to let him see how much they affected her. Clinton's arm was still between them, and he didn't let his eyes leave Royce's, his posture rigid with unspoken warning. "She's here of her own free will," Fiona said before Clinton could speak, surprising both men. Her voice was calm, but there was a firmness in it that hadn't been there before. "That's all you need to know." Royce raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by her response, but he didn't push further. Instead, he turned and walked out of the store with a final glance at Fiona, his words hanging in the air like a threat. "We'll see what your husband has to say about that." At the mention of her husband, Fiona's heart dropped, the sudden mention of Marcus hitting her like a physical blow. Clinton immediately turned to her, his face softening with concern. "Husband?" he asked, his voice gentle but filled with a curiosity she wasn't ready to answer. Fiona's face paled, her breath catching as the wall she had so carefully built around herself began to crack. She had never told Clinton the full truth of her past, the depths of the abuse she had suffered at the hands of Marcus, and now she wasn't sure she could keep it hidden any longer. But she wasn't ready to speak the words out loud. Not in front of the deputy, not in front of anyone. She wanted to run, to escape, but instead, she stood frozen in place, her mind swirling with the reality of her situation. Clinton, sensing the shift in her, took her hand and led her outside, away from the bustling market and the suffocating stares of the townspeople. Once they were outside, Fiona finally broke. The floodgates opened, and the truth came tumbling out in a rush of words, her voice trembling with the weight of the years she had spent hiding from it. "I was married at 18, she began, her words barely above a whisper, "to Marcus Greer. He wasn't the man I thought he was. At first, it was small things, little hurts, but over the years, it escalated. The beatings, the threats, the fear. I tried to leave him once before, but he found me. I thought I could escape, but he always found me. I took something from him. Documents. Evidence of his crimes. He's hunting me. He always will. The confession left her breathless, as though she had been holding her own breath for years. She didn't know what to expect from Clinton, whether he would pity her, hate her, or somehow blame her for the mess her life had become. But when she looked up, all she saw in his eyes was a quiet, unyielding resolve. He didn't judge her, didn't pity her. Instead, he stepped closer, his hand gently cupping her chin as he lifted her face to meet his. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked, his voice soft but filled with an intensity that made her heart race. "I didn't want to make you a target," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You already are," he replied, "and I don't care. He'll have to go through me to get to you." His words were a promise, a vow that she hadn't expected, but one that filled her with a strange sense of relief. For the first time in a long time, Fiona allowed herself to believe that someone might actually fight for her. Clinton took her hand, leading her back to the ranch. And for the first time, Fiona didn't feel like she was running away. She was ready to face what was coming, ready to stand beside him. That evening, as they packed their things for the journey ahead, Fiona felt the weight of their shared understanding. Clinton wasn't just offering her protection. He was offering her a future. And that future, no matter how uncertain, was one that she was willing to fight for. The morning dawned cold and gray, with a heavy silence settling over the ranch as Clinton and Fiona prepared to leave. The plan had been simple. Take the evidence, those damning ledgers, and ride hard to the capital to deliver them to a federal marshal. They would leave at dawn, before Marcus or anyone could catch wind of their intentions. Fiona's heart was heavy, the reality of what they were about to do settling deep in her chest. She hadn't seen Marcus in over a week, but the letter Clinton had burned, the whispers from the town, and the look on Royce's face had all made it clear that Marcus was closing in. It was only a matter of time before he found them, before he found her. As they saddled their horses, the first sign that something was wrong came when one of Clinton's ranch hands, breathless and wide-eyed, galloped up to the barn. "Riders coming fast," he said, his voice strained. 8 men, led by a fancy-dressed fella. "It's Marcus. He's found you." Fiona froze, her blood running cold. She knew the sound of Marcus's voice, the arrogance in the way he spoke, the coldness in his eyes. The thought of facing him again, after everything, felt like a nightmare she couldn't escape. Clinton's face hardened, his jaw clenching with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. He didn't speak, but his movements were deliberate, measured. He went to the cabin and returned with a rifle, checking it once, then twice before sliding it into place across his chest. "Get to the cellar. Lock yourself in," he said to Fiona, his voice low and steady. "I'll handle this." But Fiona didn't move. She grabbed his arm, her grip tight with fear. "He'll kill you," she said, her voice cracking. Clinton's eyes met hers, unwavering. "Not if I see him first," he replied, his voice a quiet storm of determination. Outside, the sound of hooves grew louder, the thundering rhythm of the riders approaching, and Fiona's heart pounded in her chest. The sky above them was a dull gray, the air thick with anticipation. The ranch, once so peaceful, now felt like a battleground, the very ground beneath her feet suddenly fraught with danger. She couldn't hide from this anymore. She knew Marcus was coming for her, and she couldn't let Clinton face him alone. She couldn't let him face Marcus's wrath on his own, not when he had already done so much for her. She was no longer the woman who ran, the woman who hid in fear. She was the woman who would fight for her future, who would fight for the man who had given her safety when she thought she had none. As Clinton moved toward the door, she stopped him, her voice trembling but resolute. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her eyes locking with his. "I'm staying. With you." Clinton looked at her, his eyes softening for the briefest of moments. He didn't say anything at first, only nodded once, as if to say, "Then stay close." The door to the cabin creaked open as the first of Marcus's men appeared, a figure draped in a dark coat, his expensive horse gleaming in the morning light. Behind him, the other riders began to file in, surrounding the cabin with an air of menace. Marcus Greer's cold smile was the first thing Fiona saw as he dismounted, his boots hitting the dirt with a finality that made her insides twist. He was dressed to impress, a stark contrast to the rough ranchers who worked the land, his face too clean, too smooth to fit in this place. But his eyes, they were the same, cold, calculating, and they locked onto Fiona as soon as he saw her standing by Clinton. "Hello, darling," Marcus called, his voice smooth, almost pleasant. But Fiona could hear the underlying threat, the venom that dripped from every word. "Time to come home." His gaze shifted to Clinton, and the smile on his face turned into something sharper, more dangerous. "I'm afraid the lady's with me now," Clinton said, his voice low but strong. He stepped in front of Fiona, his body a shield between her and Marcus. "And I suggest you leave." Marcus laughed, the sound like nails on a chalkboard. "She's my wife," he said, as if the words meant something more than they did. "You're harboring my property, Maddox." Clinton's eyes narrowed, his grip on the rifle tightening. "She's not property. She's a woman, and she's under my protection. You think you can stop me?" Marcus scoffed, his eyes flicking to the man behind him. "I have a legal right to her. She's my wife, and I'm taking her back." Clinton's stance didn't waver. "How about legal rights, too? I have the right to defend my property from trespassers." Marcus's eyes flicked to his men, his gaze cold, calculating. He motioned for them to spread out, closing in on the cabin. Clinton, however, stood firm, his posture unyielding. "You're not welcome here," Clinton said again, his voice deadly calm. "Leave now, or you'll regret it." Marcus's smile faded as he signaled his men to take positions. The standoff had begun. Fiona could feel the tension thick in the air, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. She had no idea how this would end, whether Marcus would force his way in or whether Clinton would stand his ground. She didn't know what was going to happen, but she knew one thing. She couldn't let Marcus win. Clinton had given her the strength to face her past, to stand tall again. She wouldn't let him fight this battle alone. "Clinton, stop," she said, her voice strong, her resolve hardening. Clinton glanced at her, his eyes softening. "Stay inside," he said, his tone gentle, but there was a finality to it. But Fiona didn't move. She stepped forward, her hand reaching out to him. "I'm not running anymore," she said, her voice steady. "We're doing this together." Just then, the door opened slightly, and one of Clinton's ranch hands appeared, his face grim. "More men on the way," he said, his voice tense. "We need to act fast." Clinton's eyes met Fiona's once more, and in that moment, they both knew there was no turning back. The fight for her future, for her safety, had arrived. And Clinton Maddox wasn't going to let anyone take her away from him. Not without a fight. 2 weeks had passed since Marcus's men were driven off, and Fiona had found herself standing at the edge of something she hadn't dared to believe possible: peace. The day after the standoff, Clinton had led her back to the ranch with a promise, one that felt almost surreal. The promise wasn't that everything would be easy, but that they would face whatever came together. Marcus had been arrested, the evidence Fiona had taken from him now in the hands of the law, and the world that had once been so filled with fear had shifted just slightly, enough to let in a sliver of light. The healing had begun, not just for Fiona, but for both of them. Clinton had been by her side every step of the way, tending to her wounds, both the physical and emotional ones. His strength was unwavering, but in these quiet days that followed, Fiona began to see the softer side of him too. The man who stayed awake at night to watch over a sick calf. The one who sat by the fire with her without saying a word, simply because his presence was enough. She wasn't used to that kind of care, not without strings attached. Slowly, she began to trust him with the smallest pieces of herself. pieces she had kept hidden for so long, afraid of what would happen if she let anyone see them. She began to help him more around the ranch, learning the ropes of managing the land, learning to care for the animals. Her hand grew steady as she worked alongside him, no longer afraid to get her hands dirty. But as much as she had healed physically, there were still nights when the old fears resurfaced. She had woken in the middle of the night, trembling from a nightmare that threatened to pull her back into that dark place where Marcus had control over her. Her heart raced, her body freezing with panic, until she felt Clinton's hand on hers. He didn't ask her to explain, didn't try to fix the problem. He simply held her, his touch steady, his silence understanding. She had never known a kind of peace like this before, and it terrified her. What if it was too good to be true? What if it slipped away like everything else in her life had? But Clinton was there, and in his arms, she slowly allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't as cruel as it had once seemed. Still, there were moments when the fear threatened to creep back in. One morning, after a long day of work, Fiona found herself sitting at the kitchen table, staring out the window. Clinton was outside, tending to the horses, and she was alone with her thoughts. She felt the weight of what had happened in the last few weeks, the loss, the betrayal, the terror, and wondered if she was truly healed. What if the scars ran too deep? What if she was too broken to move forward? She couldn't hide from it forever. And yet, the thought of moving forward with Clinton, of building a life together, was something she hadn't allowed herself to hope for until now. She had to admit to herself and to him that she wanted this. She wanted him. The fear of becoming too dependent on him, of needing him in a way that might break her, lingered like a shadow, but she couldn't deny what was blooming between them. One evening, as they sat together after a long day of work, the atmosphere between them shifted. There was a quiet tenderness in the way Clinton reached for her hand, the way he looked at her as though she were the most important thing in the world. It wasn't the first time they had shared a quiet moment like this, but tonight there was something different in the air. "What do we do now?" she asked softly, the question hanging between them. Clinton looked at her for a long moment, as though searching for the right words. "Whatever you want," he said, his voice steady and sincere. It wasn't the first time he had said those words to her, but tonight they felt like a promise. Fiona closed her eyes, letting his words settle over her like a blanket of comfort. It was a simple statement, but it held more weight than she had expected. It wasn't about controlling her, about forcing her into a life she didn't want. It was about choosing her over and over again. He wasn't just protecting her. He was asking her to choose him, to be with him, because that was what she wanted, not because she had to, and that, for the first time, made her feel free. Her mind drifted back to the day when she had first arrived at the ranch, bruised and broken. At that moment, she had been a woman who felt like she had lost everything, who had been running away from a past she couldn't escape. But now, 2 weeks later, she was standing at the edge of a new life, one where she could have a future, one where she wasn't just surviving but living. She could feel the change within herself, could sense the subtle transformation from a woman in hiding to a woman who was choosing her own path. The following morning, Fiona walked outside to the stable where Clinton was already working. She watched him for a moment, the way he moved with purpose, the way he cared for the animals with such tenderness. She had learned so much from him in the short time she had been at the ranch, not just about the land, but about life itself. Clinton had given her more than just safety. He had given her a chance to rebuild, to heal, to find her own strength again. She realized then that she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the ranch, not of Marcus, not of the future. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. And as she walked toward Clinton, he looked up and smiled, a rare, soft smile that made her heart skip a beat. "Morning," he said, his voice warm with affection. Fiona smiled back, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something she had long since buried but was now slowly allowing to come to the surface. "Morning," she replied, her voice steady. The fear had finally started to fade, replaced by the quiet certainty that she was no longer alone, no longer running. They were in this together. And for the first time, Fiona felt like she was truly home. The night before the wedding, Fiona stood alone on the porch where Clinton had first carried her, broken and trembling with fear. And though the moon was full and the stars above seemed brighter than ever, she couldn't stop the nervous flutter in her stomach. She hadn't expected to feel this way. She had thought that by now, she'd be certain that every step she had taken toward this moment would have wiped away any lingering doubts. But standing here, her heart heavy with both excitement and anxiety, she realized how far she had come. She wasn't the same woman who had collapsed in the dirt, fleeing a life filled with nothing but pain. She wasn't the same woman who had thought she had no future, no hope, no reason to live. Now, standing under the night sky with the love of her life just inside the door, waiting to begin their new life together, she realized that for the first time, she truly believed in something better. Clinton had been there every step of the way, never asking her to be anything other than herself, offering patience, care, and a promise of tomorrow. He hadn't rushed her to heal, hadn't forced her into anything. He had simply given her the space she needed to become who she was meant to be. And now, she was ready to walk beside him, to become his partner in every sense of the word. It was a strange, quiet moment, standing there in the cool air, knowing that tomorrow would change everything. She was ready to marry him, but still, something inside her hesitated, a tiny seed of uncertainty planted deep within her heart. Would she ever feel truly free? Could she ever leave behind the fear that had gripped her for so many years? The past wasn't something that could be erased, but it didn't have to define her anymore. Not with Clinton by her side. He had shown her what love could be, how a person could give without expectation, how kindness could be a balm for the soul. She had never thought this kind of love existed. But here it was undeniable, in the form of a man who had saved her in more ways than one. She wasn't broken anymore. She wasn't a victim. She was whole, and she was ready to take the next step. As she turned back toward the house, she saw Clinton standing in the doorway, his silhouette framed against the warm light of the cabin. His eyes met hers, and the smile he gave her was soft, full of love and understanding. Without a word, he crossed the threshold and approached her. His hand reached out for hers, and when he touched her, she felt the warmth of everything they had built together. Each day, each challenge, each moment of vulnerability and trust. He hadn't pushed her, hadn't demanded anything. He had simply been there, and that was more than enough. "Are you all right?" Clinton asked, his voice tender with concern. And for a moment, Fiona wondered if he could read her mind, if he somehow knew the whirlwind of emotion she was feeling. She nodded, her throat tight, unsure of how to express everything she was feeling. "I'm just nervous," she confessed, the words escaping before she could stop them. "It's all right," he reassured her, his hand cupping her cheek gently. "It's natural. We're doing this together." Fiona's breath caught at his words. For a moment, she simply stared at him, her heart swelling with emotion. This was real. This was happening. And it wasn't just a dream, a fleeting moment of hope. It was her reality. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Like I was truly home." Clinton's gaze softened, and his thumb brushed gently across her skin. "You've always been home," he said, the depth of his words settling in her heart. She had never known love like this, hadn't even known it was possible, and yet here it was, waiting for her to embrace it fully. Clinton stepped closer, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "Tomorrow, I'll marry you, and I'll spend every day after that, showing you that you don't ever have to be afraid again. You're mine, and I'm yours." Fiona's heart pounded in her chest as she looked up into his eyes, seeing everything she had longed for. She saw love, Yes, but more than that, she saw the quiet, unwavering certainty that he would always choose her, that he would always choose their future together. And in that moment, Fiona knew that she wasn't just choosing him, she was choosing herself. She was choosing a life of peace, of love, of stability, a life she had once thought impossible. I choose you, she whispered, her voice full of quiet conviction. Forever. Clinton's smile was slow but full of emotion, his hand moving to the back of her neck, pulling her closer. His lips met hers in a kiss that was everything they had been through, the tenderness, the longing, the promise of what was to come. It wasn't rushed, wasn't frantic. It was slow, deliberate, a tender connection that spoke volumes. It was the kiss of two people who had found something rare, something worth holding on to. The night stretched on, and Fiona and Clinton held each other under the stars, the promise of tomorrow lingering between them. The wedding would come, the vows would be spoken, but in this moment, under the vast, open sky, they were already joined. The next morning, Fiona woke early, the sunlight creeping through the window, casting a soft glow across the room. Today was the day. Today, she would become Clinton's wife, but more than that, today she would take her place as an equal, as his partner. The dress she had worked on in secret, stitched with her own hands, hung on a simple hook, ready for her to wear. It wasn't extravagant, but it was hers. It was a symbol of the independence she had fought so hard to reclaim. She looked at herself in the mirror as she put it on, and for the first time in years, she saw a woman who was whole, who was ready to step forward into the future. As she walked out of the room, Clinton was waiting for her in the living room, dressed in his finest, but still with that rugged charm that had first drawn her to him. His eyes softened when he saw her, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the moment settled over them. They didn't need words to understand what this day meant. Fiona walked toward him, her heart full, and as she took his hand, he leaned in and kissed her forehead, his voice quiet. "You're perfect," he said. "You always were." Fiona smiled, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "And you're everything I never knew I needed." Clinton's hand tightened around hers as they stepped outside. The guests already gathered beneath the small, makeshift arch where the ceremony would take place. The community had come together for this day, everyone who had stood by them, who had seen their love grow. And as Fiona walked down the simple dirt path toward Clinton and their future, she didn't feel the weight of the past anymore. The past had shaped her, yes, but it no longer had a hold on her. She was free. As they stood together at the altar, Clinton's hand in hers, the preacher spoke the words that bound them together, but it wasn't the vows that stood out. It was the quiet certainty in Clinton's voice when he said, "I choose you every day, for all my days." And when Fiona spoke her vows, her voice steady, but full of emotion, she promised, "Clinton, you've shown me what love really is. I choose you, freely and fully, for the rest of my life." Their kiss sealed the promise, and the crowd cheered. The barn dance that followed was a celebration of love, of healing, and of new beginnings. Fiona danced freely, her joy uncontained as she twirled under the lights, laughing as Clinton stumbled through a few awkward steps. The community had embraced her, and with that embrace, she finally felt that she belonged. Later, as the evening came to a close, Clinton pulled her aside, his eyes soft with love. "You happy?" he asked, his voice low. Fiona smiled, her heart light. "Happier than I ever thought was possible." "This is just the beginning," Clinton said, his voice full of quiet certainty. "I know," Fiona replied, resting her head against his chest. "And I'm not afraid anymore." They left the celebration together, hand in hand, riding off into the night, the golden glow of the prairie stretching out before them. As they reached the ranch, Clinton helped Fiona down from the horse, and in that moment, everything seemed to come full circle. He carried her over the threshold once again, but this time, she was no longer broken. She was home. The room was soft with the glow of candlelight. And as they shared their first night as husband and wife, there were no more fears, no more doubts. Only love, only the future. And as the sun rose the next morning, they woke together, knowing that this was just the beginning. Together, they had created something beautiful, something lasting, and nothing could ever tear them apart.